Howdy, everybody, and welcome to Fundamentals for Startups. I'm Brady Ryan, manager at CoMotion Labs. For those of you that are new to us, CoMotion Labs provides a multi-industry lab system hosting startups inside and outside of the UW community in life sciences, biotech and health tech, medical devices, robotics and hardware, software, IT, and fintech. Our startups range from pre-seed to Series A, employing 2 to 15 people each, and are variously headed by students, faculty, and community leaders with both new and seasoned entrepreneurs represented. While we wait for everyone to log in, I'll make a few announcements. First, tomorrow is Halloween. I dressed up. Next week, we will have the final installment of our fall quarter Fundamentals for Startups. Liana Antonovich, management consultant at Copernici, presents from 2 to 100 people, evolution of a founding team as your business grows. All of our Fundamentals for Startups presentations are archived on our CoMotion website under Labs and Startup Training videos. We've covered a variety of topics over the past several years, so if you find yourself with some free time, check out our past talks. For our full schedule and to register for future Fundamentals, please visit comotion.uw.edu/events. This year, we're proud to partner with Bluetooth to support the Fundamentals for Startups program. See how Bluetooth audio sharing is poised once again to change the way you will experience audio and connect with the world around you.
Bluetooth introduced the world to wireless audio. Calling, listening, watching, making us safer, more productive, more joyful. It's part of the fabric of our lives. Now, Bluetooth will bring us even closer to each other and our world with audio sharing. It will let us share with others our music, our experiences, listening and watching together. The places we go will share with us, enriching our experiences, helping us hear our world. Breaking down barriers between interests, cultures, generations. Introducing Bluetooth audio sharing. Closer together.
Today, we have a special edition of Friday Fundamentals. We are featuring a couple of entrepreneurs who will be telling their Halloween horror stories. As we all know, startup life can be difficult, but it's downright terrifying when things go wrong. First, we have Paul Sweegle. Paul is general counsel to several tech companies and advises a dozen others as outside counsel. To date, he has served as general counsel to 13 companies and has completed $12 billion of financing and M&A deals, including growing and selling startups to public companies like ING, Capital One, Nortech, and Abbott. He is the author of 2 books available on Amazon, Startup Law and Fundraising for Entrepreneurs and Startup Advisors, and Contract Drafting and Negotiation for Entrepreneurs and Business Professionals. Paul also serves as an adjunct law professor at Seattle University School of Law, teaching his course, Counseling Startups, Law, Regulation, and Fundraising. We'll take questions via chat. Feel free to ask them throughout Paul's story, and I'll now turn the event over to Paul.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, Brady, and welcome everyone. Very nice to be here. Unfortunately, I have way too much experience telling scary startup stories. It got to the point where I had heard so many such stories in 2016, I decided to travel the country and give a talk called Startup Law and Fundraising, which I gave 25 times in 15 cities. And a lot of it is colored by anecdotes of startup horror stories. After that, I did write the book that Brady just mentioned, which is almost 600 pages. I got it down from 900 pages. Again, 51 pretty spooky stories. When I was asked to do this, the charge was, hey, do you have a really scary startup story that has a happy ending? And I said, no, I do not. Usually, when you have a startup horror story, it ends very badly. Startups operate on a shoestring. They need to hit milestones. They need to raise funds. they need to hit their, key metrics. And when really bad things happen, it can have a cascading effect. But I did think long and hard about it, and I found one that had half of a happy ending. In the book, this is startup case study number 11, and I call it Trust But Verify. But maybe for today, the better name, spookier name is Final Nail in the Coffin, or perhaps Dead End, Dead Equity. This is a story about a young founder and a musician, an up-and-coming artist, kind of a famous rap artist with connections to Dr. Dre. He came up with a really clever idea, a streaming service, a subscription streaming service that would combine the best of Spotify, kind of old school Facebook with the community building, and a record label. And so I'll call him the musician founder. If you're familiar with Goofus and Gallant, he's more gallant than Goofus. He was the visionary for this platform. It was his idea. He has industry connections. He's a very talented musician with tons of followers on YouTube and elsewhere. And he also was very technically proficient. He knew how to, he knew what the platform should include. But he wasn't someone who'd ever formed a company, managed a company, or raised funds. And so he reached out to someone he had worked with before, someone he'd had good experiences with and a little bit of, some bad experiences. But on average, they must have been better than worse. It was someone who had run a record label that was fairly successful until it wasn't. The musician founder was on this record label. And the other individual, I'll call him the fundraising founder. He talked a good game. I can form a company. I can manage a company. I can be that CEO, and I'm very good at fundraising. Well, it seemed like a pretty good relationship because both had the common roots in music. And so on its face, it looked good. But it wasn't good forever. On the music side, on the platform side, things went extremely well. This was kind of early 2016, and this thing received attention very early from Billboard magazine, from The Stranger, and other magazines. Musicians were interested in this platform. They were willing to give up a piece of music or more was the commitment. And in exchange, the musicians would get 65% of the royalties from the $5 a month subscription that subscribers would pay. And it would be calibrated, their payments would be calibrated based on their percentage of streaming on the platform. So they were incented to put more music up, but 30 bands were signed up to put music up. And the platform was nearing, completion as a beta platform in August of 2016. And the founder, the fundraising founder, he's a reputable person. He was on the board of a major radio station that you're all familiar with. And he was talking a good game. And even in the press, he was saying, I have lined up funding. I have angel investors. We don't need venture capital. I went back and looked at the press and I saw that line. I thought, well, okay. So with his assurances that they had raised money, they hired a team. They built a team. They had 10 people on this team, 5 full-time, 5 part-time, as I recall. And folks left jobs to join this startup. And even one person relocated to Seattle, as I recall. And everything was going great, especially on the important part, the public facing. Here's the platform. Here's the artists. They had A&R folks, very talented name. You'd recognize their name, sort of household name people were involved in this. And people were getting paid for at least a month or two. And then all of a sudden, some checks started bouncing. And they were payroll checks. And the fundraising founder stepped in and said, oh, sorry, this is a timing issue. I've heard that before, and it's legitimate, a timing issue. I will recut the checks. He recut the checks. Everyone's happy about that information until those checks bounced. And so things went downhill rapidly at that point. People pushed the fundraising founder for an explanation. He did a mea culpa at a meeting where he said, essentially, I have raised no money. I have spent about $250,000 of my own money pretending that I had raised money. we are out of money and I don't have any leads, was essentially what he was saying. So this is sort of where the horror story begins. And this is where I was brought in. So for a long time, I had been sort of accumulating this reputation, starting, sometime after. I've been working with startups since 2000. And maybe starting in about 2012, I started getting a reputation of someone who could fix broken startups. And I'm fairly accessible and open to helping people. Any of you who want to reach out to me, have a question, you can always reach me at psweegle@gmail.com. And so I received a call. I was running around downtown. I received a call, and it was very typical. Hey, I hear you help fix broken startups. And so these are usually interesting calls. Depending on the time of day, I might step into a coffee shop and get a coffee, or step into a bar and get a beer and say, what is this story? And so it was coffee that day, and I got that whole story. And I was really intrigued with the project, and I really liked the idea of being in music, because I myself am a musician. I have had my own recording studio. I'm on 6 albums. I still play in a band. And so this was a good fit for me as well. And I agreed to be general counsel and try and pull this mess out of the ditch. And so I quickly looked at the situation and essentially decided that, hey, this person has essentially committed fraud. And everyone viewed it as fraud. And very quickly, employees were filing grievances and complaints and claims with the state. So things escalated quickly, even before I was brought on board. And so I proposed that the only way to fund this and get it moving forward and realize the dream would be if the fundraising founder stepped aside. In fact, he really hadn't done anything. He'd been sort of an investor, but he really hadn't done what he'd promised to do, which was get the thing on a solid foundation and funded. And so we needed his shares to move forward. We needed that equity. One of the possible titles for this was dead equity. If you run out of equity to sell, if you have dead equity on your cap table, it's hard to bring in new investors. And so I really thought we needed to move this person out, put in place a 36-month convertible note, or note that he could be paid back in 36 months. That'd give the company time to raise money, build the platform, scale up, and then pay him back. And the fundraising founder agreed with this. He said, that's fine. I will do anything to move past this situation. I feel terrible. I have lied to everybody. I've essentially committed fraud. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I wrote up a settlement agreement. Then the fundraising founder gave it to a lawyer. That lawyer was not a startup lawyer. That was a litigator. And he was very naive, in my view, about what it would take to get this company moving forward. He didn't agree that my plan was the plan. He wanted the fundraising founder to stay on as a 50% owner and power through this somehow. And I have done this enough. And I told him I've done this enough to know. I've already seen cap tables that had 15% debt equity not be able to raise capital. 50% is way too much. And so we went around and around, and I could not get this attorney to relent. And I was getting concerned about the wage claims and the vendor claims. It was well over $150,000, as I recall. And I was concerned that the innocent founder was going to get hit with these personal liabilities. Wage theft is a liability of officers and directors of a company. And so I said, look, I've been trying for weeks to get the formation documents for this entity. I need them now. And so I managed to get them. I can't remember if it was through the opposing counsel or the musician founder, but I got the documents. And lo and behold, they'd formed the wrong kind of entity. They hadn't finished creating it. They should have formed a corporation, in my view, which is easier to fundraise for a variety of reasons. There's tax advantages, and it's easier to give employees stock options and to kind of pay less and give equity. It's harder to do that with a limited liability company. But they also hadn't formed the entity completely by creating what's called an operating agreement or a company agreement. And I asked for it, and I was told there isn't any. There was just this one-page initial formation document with the fundraising founder's name on it. So I told the musician founder, I said, look, I found something that's very interesting. There's a lot of liabilities here, and you can walk away from them. You, sir, are not a founder. You, sir, are not an owner. You're not a director. You're not an officer. You're an innocent victim. And I said, we're not getting anywhere. This thing is going down. I wouldn't try and save it under these circumstances. And so, I said that this is sort of a half horror story and half good story. Well, the part of it that's a half a good story is that the innocent founder was able to walk away from this burning wreck. And he got a job very quickly at Spotify. He moved to LA. He went down there. He was hanging out with his friend, Dr. Dre again. So things were pretty good for him. But the horror story, I'm sure, continued for the fundraising founder who lost $250,000. I was going to save him his $250,000. We were going to commit to pay that back. His attorney gave terrible advice. He lost the $250,000, and I am positive the state shook him down for another $150,000 for these wage claims. So, it's a horror story that ended badly. A dream was wiped out. Of a viable platform, an experiment in music distribution and community was lost. But at least the innocent founder walked away from the wreck. And there's a few morals of this story, and they're all in my book. They're all there. You've got to form the right entity. You've got to complete the formation of the entity. You've got to pick your founders well. You have to complement each other. And then in terms of your skills and abilities, you have to trust each other, but you have to verify. You have to know what each other are doing. I told this musician founder, look, you didn't even know what kind of entity was formed. You didn't sign any documents. There wasn't a board created. You weren't appointed an officer. You had no idea what sort of fundraising was going on. So you're lucky to walk away from this thing. And you wouldn't have if this guy would have been better at his job. If he'd have made you a director, you'd have been stuck in this burning wreck. So that is my horror story final nail in the coffin.
We usually think that attorneys are the scariest people in the whole wide world, but it looks like they can actually be quite useful. That's a great story. If there's any folks that have questions for Paul, please throw them in the chat. So I'd love to hear. I mean, I'm kind of a glutton for punishment. I'd love to hear a quick story that did not end well. I mean, just like you said, I know startups are kind of running that razor's edge. Cash strapped the whole time, and most folks, if there's a big issue, it goes poorly in a somewhat fatal way. I wonder if there's a couple themes that you see where those horror stories end up being the end of the day for companies, so folks can hopefully avoid them.
Yeah, sure. There's just a number of ways, unfortunately, that things can go badly. And that is exactly the reason I traveled the country and gave my talk startup on fundraising in 15 cities, that and my penchant for tax deductible travel, obviously. But right before I decided to do that, in the week before I woke up, August 2nd, 2016 or something like that, I said, I've got to work on this problem and try and get people to stop wrecking their companies. There were two calls that came in the week that I formed my company, Business Law Seminar Group. The first was that I got a call from another lawyer. I get a lot of calls from other lawyers say, hey, I've got a problem with this startup. Can you help? And I say, sure. What happened here? He said, well, I've got two co-founders of a company that is creating great software. It's selling like hotcakes. They're doing great. When they formed this company, both of them did all the right things and they made all the right assurances. And one of those assurances, reps and warranties, we call them, to get their stock in the entity that you have to make, is that I have full license to all the IP I'm going to contribute. I have not signed any contradictory documents, proprietary information and invention agreement that says I can't contribute my intellectual property to this new enterprise. And it turned out that one of them was subject to a PIIA and that everything he had contributed to this well-selling software was owned by his former employer. That is what I consider kind of an unsolvable problem. This new employer knew that the employee had gone and created a company that was in the same industry. So it wasn't going to be a secret. And you can't raise money by committing fraud. So once you know that you don't own your IP, you are prohibited from really raising money effectively unless you say, hey, we don't own this IP, but you still want to invest. That's going to be a tough sell. And the only thing you can do is go back to the prior employer and try to negotiate a royalty. And so I didn't even follow up on that. I don't know what happened, but that's a pretty stiff royalty when you take someone's IP and then you build a competing product. So that did not go well, I'm sure. There's no upside there. That's just a bad story. So that one, I'm still sort of mulling that one over and tried to help the lawyer as best I could. I said, look, you just have to negotiate a royalty. That's it. There's no other way out of that one. Then I get a call from someone who's actually an entrepreneur, and he says, hey, someone stole my startup. And I'm like, okay, well, tell me about that. So, well, a few of us were kind of talking about this business, sitting around. We were kind of meeting. We met maybe 4 or 5 times, and we talked about my idea. And I was sort of trying to get ideas from others about this app we were going to build. And they spent enough time talking about this entity, that everyone, I think it was 3 or 4 people contributed. And then I think it was 3 of them. Then 2 of them formed a company, and the other person sort of drifted off and didn't show much interest. And so the 2 formed the entity, and they, when they raised some money and showed some level of success, the third person came in and said, hey, I'm really excited what you've done with our company. I want my 1/3. And the issue there is the risk of what's called a general partnership, or more sort of in lay speak, an accidental partnership. If 3 people, and this happens in academia a lot, and I always kind of wonder, how CoMotion and others get around this. I have my ways of getting around it, but if you just work up a business plan without forming an entity, without NDAs, without any documentation, without at least one person asserting, hey, I own this idea, and you're just kind of contributing based on this NDA, but I still own everything. There's a lot of different ways to structure it, but you have to structure it because in a vacuum, the person had a legitimate claim. It looked like, based on what he was explaining. So in that case, the guy, felt like he'd lost 1/3 of his company, and he didn't want to, pay for a lot of legal advice to fix that. But that was one of the potential outcomes, was that he'd lost his company. And again, it's not having a solid foundation. He should have formed an entity, signed NDAs, and then brought people in to get advice, then subject to the NDA, which says, I'm not giving you any IP, and you're not getting IP by talking with me. We're talking about maybe forming a relationship where you might be a founder, but protecting the IP. And so that didn't happen there. So the foundation of companies is very important. Protecting IP is important. And another big thing that's important is when you take money, taking it on the right terms from the right persons, from the right individuals, entities.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like so many really terrible stories can be avoided if folks just call an attorney sooner. So thank you for that. One question from Eric Bell: did you ever figure out why the funding founder from the previous story didn't do their job? Were they trying to and just couldn't get it done, or did you ever figure out what was going on?
We never dug too deeply into that. I do believe maybe he had emotional or psychological ups and downs, and he may have signed on in a manic moment, and then when it came to execute, he may have been in a depressive phase or something. But it did seem like a complete default in what he was supposed to have been doing. He never provided a list of investors that he'd solicited. And so I think, as far as we knew, maybe he tried to solicit investors. He didn't have here's all the people I've approached, and here's what they said. It seemed like just a complete default as near as I could tell. We didn't spend a ton of time on that, but he had no solution or near-term idea for fixing it. He was just giving up, it sounded like.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Paul. That was great. A fantastic horror story to start it off. Next, we have Robin Glenn, CEO and co-founder of Base Education. Robin is an accomplished therapist with over 20 years of experience working with at-risk teens in schools, as well as in private practice. Robin's history includes roles as a school-based therapy specialist for at-risk teens and private practice therapist for adolescents and their families. She has and continues to train law enforcement, school administrators and faculty, medical professionals, and members of the community through various speaking engagements and seminars on issues pertaining to at-risk youth. We are going to start with a quick video that introduces Robin and her company, and then she will take it from there.
for tonight.
Stop it!
Welcome to BASE Education, the only clinically developed social-emotional learning program that provides a quiet, private, and safe space for students to share and reflect. BASE was created to offer students an outlet for personal growth. Through its quiet design, BASE provides students an introspective space to reflect on their lives without the noise and distractions of everyday life that prevents them from focusing on themselves. The respectful, therapeutic approach encourages students to make discoveries about themselves while giving them a sense of hope about their future. Every element, down to the smallest detail, has been built with the student's experience in mind. Vivid imagery is carefully selected to illustrate concepts and guide them through storytelling. The calming design allows for thoughts to be deeply explored. Each screen contains minimal text and is designed to actively engage the emotion center of the brain. The result is a non-academic look and feel to evoke optimal engagement. BASE Education's unique model gives students autonomy to share, yet provides a way for educators to quickly connect with and understand their students better. BASE Education is the only SEL program with the capacity to be used fully online or in the classroom and can track potentially harmful language with real-time response monitoring. Given the enormous challenges in the instructional day, educators rarely have the time and resources to give every student the one-on-one attention they deserve. BASE makes it possible for educators to know their students at a deeper level, hear their stories, and provide them with the individualized support they each need. The human element is so important, and BASE doesn't seek to replace this. Rather, BASE provides an efficient pathway for educators to learn more about their students. Students need committed adults who are willing to work with them and provide insight into their lives. Students who use BASE report feeling cared for and heard. Effective social-emotional learning support cannot be a box-checking exercise. BASE Education believes students deserve to experience growth in the best way possible, and educators deserve to have the tools that give them a leg up when supporting their students. Whether it's used in the classroom for group instruction or one-on-one online, BASE is a proven CASEL-approved solution to meet the complex social, emotional, and mental health needs of today's students. We are here to help you empower your students and prepare them for life's journey.
Okay, well, we will take questions via the chat, and I'll hand it over to Robin.
Hi, thank you for having me. So unlike Paul, whose life is exciting and fairly calm, like he's a well-oiled machine, I can tell. I'm in the middle of, I think my entire life is one horrible, spooky story. So I actually had the folks at UW, I just made that name up. I don't know if you guys call yourselves UW, but do you, Brady? Call yourself
yeah,
UW?
we do, actually. That's perfect.
Okay, good. That was a good guess. So I gave a list of stories and had them picked because I honestly could go on and on for days about the nightmarish lifestyle of an entrepreneur, which I'm sure many of you can relate to. It has been a journey, I'll tell you that. And one of the worst stories of our entire company's existence, we've been around for almost 8 years now, and one of the worst stories is, trying to get on the map and trying to be recognized and wanting some of those big dog companies to pick you up as a distribution partnership. It sounds like a great idea. And it, the thought of a distribution partnership means that you've landed, you've finally made it, you've been recognized, and someone takes you seriously. So we got a call for a potential distribution partnership with a really reputable company. And I had heard about them in the schools. I had seen them in action when I was working in the schools, as well as just private practice, hearing certain kids go to school online. And we were off to the races. It was a marriage. And unfortunately, I did not know some certain details that were behind the scenes that I was not privileged to know. So we started our distribution partnership, and I thought everything was going to be great. It was going to land us on the map. We were going to triple our sales. And some of those things did happen, but it wasn't that easy. So my scary story is about distribution partnerships. This company started selling us. They were off to the races. They sold $1 million worth of product in like 6 weeks. It was crazy. I mean, they were just going. Our product, as you may have just seen on the video, is not really a plug and play. You can't just like set it and forget it. We need pretty ample training and strong implementation, and our partners have to really understand how to use it. You're dealing with a kid's mental health, and their well-being is on the line if you're not appropriately trained. In addition, another thing that's at risk is an educator's confidence level in being able to come to these kids and use this program and think outside the box and get out of their comfort zone, hitting social emotional learning, which is basically mental health in schools. So we had a lot at stake. And what this company did is they sold the pants out of our product, and we were so happy. They were a full service variable reseller, so it meant that they were taking on sales and services and support. So it was on them to deliver all of the back end tasks. So when we started comparing and getting our quarterly statements from them and comparing notes and seeing how great things were, there were a couple questions that came to our minds about how are you guys training all of these clients? This is pretty intense. Like, you're really ramping up there, and like, we can't sustain that. Granted, we're tiny, but even still, that's a lot of training to implement. So the questions started coming, and they were like, no, this is great. We're servicing them. We're training them. It's wonderful. It's amazing. So fast forward about 10 months later, this is the big shame on us moment. I've learned since then, but the big shame on us moment was they informed us that all along they had been being groomed for an acquisition, and we did not know that. And so they were not at liberty to share that information with us. They also, there were no implications for them on the back end for not meeting their contractual obligations of training and implementing our clients. So they sold the pants off of our product, didn't implement, didn't train, never set up the clients. So when they were acquired and ultimately out of the partnership, we were left with a huge book of business, which was amazing and wonderful, over almost $2 million in business, which was great. And all 2 million of them were furious with us because they'd never been trained, they'd never been implemented. They bought this program and never used it, never had use for it, and no one ever talked to them ever again. So it made us look really bad. So we went from a retention rate of 93% to a retention rate of 37% in the course of a year. And so most of you know that is like death for a startup. You're only as good as your renewals. And so when it came time to renew these contracts, we were scrambling. We knew 10 months in that things were bad. We just didn't know how bad. And when we reacquired those clients, we were on the phone with them trying to make amends and saying, look, we didn't know. And we didn't really want to out that company too badly because they're nice people. They were just doing business. And so we really had a mess to clean up. So the year after that, after our 30% renewal rate, we went up to 65% renewal, which is still horrible, but we were going for funding. And so nobody's going to fund a company with a renewal rate of 37% or of 65%. Nobody wants to touch that. And it wasn't our fault, but it was our fault, but it wasn't, but it was. So at any rate, it was a nightmare. And we really, really have had to clean that up. And it has taken years to come out of this mess. And we just got our renewal rate up to, I think we're at like 88% now, still cleaning up these people. It's because some of them were multi-year contracts. But it's been really challenging, and, you know, it reflected on us poorly. It reflected on me poorly as a decision maker. But I wasn't privy to the fact that they were being acquired, and I wasn't being told the truth about the depth of their implementations and training. So that's been a really hard piece to talk about with potential investors. Because while the story is explainable, it still kind of makes me look pretty stupid. So that's been really challenging. And I know I went through my story quickly. So because there's nothing really to add to it other than the fact that distributions, while they seem like they're great, they really can be, but they're very, very tricky. We've now been through 3 of them. So that was my first one. We've been through 3, and the one we're in now seems pretty stable. And I think we've learned our lessons. However, if any of you future budding entrepreneurs out there are thinking about distribution partnerships, think long and hard. Think about what you want the outcome to be. Think about why you want to be in this, and is it just to get recognized? And if it's for that like overnight fame, wrong reason, which is kind of where I was at the time. I think that ultimately distribution partnerships can serve their purpose, but a lot of research has to go into them, and you have to make sure that you don't do any collateral damage to your own company, which is exactly where we landed, and now we're cleaning up. We're pretty fortunate in the fact that we were able to clean up that mess and come through it and survive, because they had more clients than we even had on our initial book. And so we were able to handle that, but it almost took us down, and what we thought could be an amazing opportunity to grow almost took us to our knees. So that's my horror story that I continue to deal with on a daily basis. But, you know, again, like Paul said, there are positives and negatives to every story, and the positive is that it was a learning experience. The negative was all the fallout that we continue to deal with. And Paul, I just wanted to say one thing. You were talking about S corps and how important the S corps are when looking, or C corps, sorry, not S corps, C corps, when looking at potential fundraising and all of the implications with those. And we hit that hardcore because we're still an LLC, and we wanted to. One of the perks of a startup is being able to offer your employees stock options, and so we can't offer our employees stock options. And so they're like, well, what am I going to get out of this? Like 110-hour work weeks and crummy pay and stress and gray hair. So we actually had to make some of our employees K1s to make good on that, which is a whole other mess. They're all like technically self-employed. So when you said that, it resonated with me on, yeah, if you can convert over quickly and early, do it for sure. Cause that's a whole other, that's next Halloween.
Yeah, that is a really important point for people to realize. It's easy to form an LLC. You can do it in a few minutes, and then the problems begin. It's just a completely different entity. It's flow-through taxation. Sure, you can change that, but it's still an LLC. Corporations have been around since the 1800s. LLCs were invented in Wyoming in the 70s. Corporations are based in statutes and case law that is very predictable. LLCs, there is nothing predictable about LLCs. There's no case law. And there's just a whole bunch of things that just don't work. A lot of times folks form an LLC because they want to harvest the tax losses right up front, the expenses of setting up the corporation. Really nice that you can net that against your other income. But you know, and there are other situations where an LLC is important, like if you have a lifestyle small business where you don't need a bunch of money from third parties and you can pay your employees okay. But unless you have really strong tax reasons for picking an LLC, it's the wrong choice. There's so many things about corporations that are better for a high growth rate startup. The ability to issue stock options cannot be underestimated. A lot of people, I have a case study in my book called Not an Option. Every time I tell someone you shouldn't form an LLC, I give them a whole bunch of reasons. And I say, you really cannot give equity very easily in an LLC. And you cannot give stock options because LLCs don't issue stock. And then they'll form the LLC form, and a few weeks later, without fail, they'll say, okay, now we want to issue stock options. I'm like, what part of the conversation were you tuning out? You cannot. And it's not easy to convert a corporation to an LLC, or an LLC to a corporation. I converted a Washington LLC to a Delaware corporation about a year ago. And it was so complicated, kind of messy. You've got tax issues, basis issues, you've accounting things. You've got to close the books. There's stuff that you don't want to deal with. And it took about 6 corporate documents. And I, a lawyer, with 32 years, I punted to an outside firm. Like, I'm not dealing with this. I've got better things to do than shepherd 6 documents through this system. So, and there's benefits to corporations. VCs cannot invest in an LLC. That is really important to know. They cannot, because of a thing called it's a business tax issue. They're not allowed to have unrelated business taxable income. The investors in VCs, because they're essentially foundations and trusts and things like that. So VCs don't invest in LLCs. So there's a huge chunk of your investor market gone. On the flip side, there's a rule called tax code provision called Section 1202. Stock in a corporation that has assets under $50 million issued to early investors is essentially tax-free when it's held for 5 years. It's called tax-free founder stock, essentially. So, and that is not allowed. That does not apply to LLCs. So there's just a lot of reasons that LLCs are not the best choice for a high-growth startup where you're looking to incentivize employees and bring in third-party investors.
Yeah. Robin, I really love your story. And you mentioned that you sent us a sort of a menu of stories that you could tell. And I'm looking at it again. And one of the other ones is another distribution partnership that went south. You said the partnership in bed with us long enough to get our secret sauce, et cetera. I'd love to hear that. I think we've got enough time.
Okay. So the company that acquired the one that we were with, we were automatically just kind of brought in with them, and they already had a company doing what we do. And so I was like, how's this going to work? I don't think this is going to set either of us up for success. And they basically were like, well, may the best company win. Let's see how it goes over the next 3 months. I did not necessarily want to be with this company. It wasn't my choice, and we just sort of were like pushed in and funneled in, and my herd of cattle went into the ring, and there we were. So it was, and I'm not calling my team a herd of cattle. I'm probably the cow, and they're like the riders. So like, let's make that very clear. But they again took our product, started selling the pants off of our product. They did awesome sales. Again, no servicing, because they knew they were never going to keep us. So they kept us long enough to get under the hood, get our secret sauce, get our content, take our kind of our approaches, and take a lot of what we did and apply it to the company that they already had, that they were already working with, that they knew they were going to keep. That company was easier to work with because theirs was a more simple solution. It wasn't a clinically based solution. It was just sort of like character education. So it just doesn't go as deep. And it's just videos. And so ours is videos and content, and it's just the breadth of what we offer is deeper. So they knew they were never going to keep us, but they knew they needed to add a little bit of spice to what they had. So they took what we had to offer and actually took our course titles and said that this company offered our course titles. They took a lot of our proprietary information, and then we decided that we weren't going to give it 3 months, and we decided this needed to end pretty quickly. We had a feeling that it was going a little bit awry. Sales were phenomenal, but again, shaking hands with the devil is a tricky thing in a startup. I think you get in a situation where you're so desperate at times to just have that recognition, have that opportunity for growth, have the visibility, and these giant corporations are equipped to put you in this position. They're also equipped to take you down, and it's business. They just don't care. And this is my baby. I am gray from it. My kids are like, they tout themselves as interns of my company, and I hope they know they're more than just interns, that they're my children.
You're going to quickly be running afoul of some child labor laws, but keep going.
Call social services on me. It's fine. If I spend a weekend in prison, I'll probably get a rest. I'm so tired. Like, I would just sleep. But it's challenging. And so they took our secret sauce. And then when that relationship ended, we ended up having to slap them with a cease and desist and ask them to change their marketing materials because they were stealing our stuff. So, and you don't really want to make waves either in the industry that you're in with these large companies because they can do a lot of damage. And so we're just this little guy who, I basically spent like my year's salary with a cease and desist letter. But it was worth it, it was tiny but mighty. And I think, you can't give up your footing with your company. You have to stand up for it like it is your baby. And that mama, papa, bear scenario, or to be more gender neutral, the they bear. The they bear has to stand up for the baby. And without that, it doesn't stand a chance. So distribution partnerships, tricky, but potentially worth it. We're in a good one now, and we're cautiously optimistic.
Robin, were there things that you would have put into the distribution agreement in hindsight to have protected some of the know-how, the trade secrets, the copyrights, the other intellectual property?
Oh, yeah. You pull out that book of yours. Like, if I were to start typing now, I could sit on it and see over my dashboard. It's just, it's crazy. I think that, having protected accounts, dealing with protected accounts, dealing with channel conflict, dealing with, the ability to take some of our material. It's really hard to have intellectual property when it's technology. We've learned it's very hard to patent technology. It's easier to do a physical object that you can create and manufacture. So really, it's about staying ahead of the race and holding your cards close to your chest and not showing too much of your product. But it's hard to do that when you're in a distribution partnership. But so I would really caution people to get to know your people very, very well. Ask the hard questions. Challenge your distribution partnerships. Ask them the questions that may make the room very uncomfortable. Don't be afraid that you're going to lose the partnership by asking these questions. If they don't want to answer them, they're not the right partner for you, and the right partner will come along. But you can't bank on your personal growth happening through a distribution. It's like a spouse. They're nice to have, but they don't complete you as a person. You got to stand on your own first, and then they're the additive.
I love those takeaways there, and it's similar to what happens, I think, with some VC pitches, or maybe this doesn't really happen. I think everyone's seen this on TV. It probably happens once in a while, but you hear about startups that are pitching to a VC, and man, the partners are so interested on the tech side. Like, yeah, tell me more about this. How do you structure your data? What do your data warehouses look like? And then the engineers will get excited and whiteboard it out, and then the VC drops off the map. Come to find out, they've invested in a direct competitor and they're just working them for information, right? So it's sad that it happens both at the investor level and at the distributor level, but it sounds like it's really important to know who you're potentially getting in bed with before you start giving out your secrets. Eric Bell.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Eric Bell had a question about the first story you gave. He said you described the distribution company as really nice people who are just doing business. Are you too nice? I was too nice. I'm trying to be nice on this presentation. Okay. So yeah, they were nice people. They were out for blood,
as business people. I think there are two sides of everyone. However, if you can be dirty in business, you can be dirty in life. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. It leads together. I was too nice. She's gone. I'm not her anymore. So yeah.
Was there any way to have known? I mean, going back, I mean, there's better ways, you said, to write language into the contracts about protected accounts and all that. But is there any way to know when you're talking to a distributor or a supplier or anything, if there's anything happening on the back end about an acquisition and they're just trying to pump their numbers?
Not really. I mean, they all had gag orders. They weren't allowed to talk about it. We had no way of knowing. We didn't know. And actually, a lot of people that we were talking to who were our direct contacts outside of the CEO and the exec team, they didn't know until the day of the acquisition. So it was tricky. Yeah. That's tough. With the VC thing, at least, there's so much data out there now. If anybody's talking to a VC, you can see who their portfolio is, and you can do research on them and see if they have an investment in a direct competitor. But yeah, on your side, I guess you just have to assume that, I guess that's what contracts are for, the unforeseen. So,
and I think it's also,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think it's also important to realize that even if you have an NDA, even if you have a contract, people will breach those things. Damages, they don't just fall from heaven. You have to file a lawsuit. You have to pursue them. So when you were talking about VCs and others, it just reminded me of something that I always tell founders, like, do not tell anything more than you need to tell. Do not share any more than you need to share, because enforcing an NDA or even any other kind of contract, that it comes with costs and it comes with uncertainty, and it's not perfect. So the better part of valor is to just hold your cards close. And I find this all the time with VCs, that they won't sign NDAs. So you don't even have an NDA. So you really just need to tell the technology folks to be very careful. Don't get excited. Don't share more than we need to share. Do not show the architecture in anything other than a very vague way.
No one's going to look out for you but yourself, I guess. Well, if there's no more questions, we had one quick question. Paul, what instrument do you play?
Well, mostly I'm a drummer, but I play a little guitar, a little bass. I've taken piano lessons, but mostly I'm a drummer. I currently play in a band around Seattle, although no one's playing around Seattle, but it's called the Pop Cycle. And we'll probably do a pop-up rock show in Ballard in the coming weeks or months. We've been talking about that, and I told them it'd be kind of fun if you guys all got arrested, and then I could take the pictures, and then we'd have some press.
Yeah, love it. Great. Sure. Why not? Well, folks, everybody, thank you to the two of you, first of all, for spending time and helping us get smart on some horror stories. Really appreciate the time that you guys have given us. For everybody watching along at home, I have to find out where I put my talking points. Thank you for attending. That's all we have time for. Next week at noon, we're going to have another Friday Fundamentals, and that will be our last until January. I hope that you will join us for that, so sign up. We'll see y'all next week. We're going to do more Friday Fundamentals in the spring or in the winter, and then again in the spring. So once you're on our mailing list, you'll be hearing about all of them. We really appreciate you guys all joining in, and please have a happy, safe Halloween tomorrow. Bye, everybody.